Thanks so much, everyone, for watching. We've got an epic lineup tonight of speakers. We've got an awesome panel here. Amazing group of functional doctors, technology, activists, for a leap forward in medicine.
You know, our goal is to make it easy for practitioners to learn in community.
This ecosystem that has been set up by the meetup groups, we believe will be the future ecosystem of this evolved primary care network, and it all revolves around you.
Welcome to the Functional Forum. Thanks for joining us in the charge to accelerate the evolution of medicine. Please welcome your host, James Masco.
Hello and welcome to the 72nd episode of the Functional Forum. This month we're going to be talking about biotransformation, otherwise known as detoxification. And not only are we going to be hearing from some of the leaders in the field, but we are also going to be issuing you a challenge to really get involved and transform the health of your community. Enjoy. Welcome. We couldn't have a conversation about detox without having Dr. Bob Rountree back on the show. Doc, thanks for agreeing to be back on the show.
Yes, thank you.
So we're here at the IFM Biotransformation module, and just 4 days ago, we got to start with this, functional medicine in JAMA. I know you've been doing this for a long time. How does it feel?
This is huge. Yeah. I can't even tell you how great it is. Journal of the American Medical Association, that gives us a validation that we've really been wanting and knew we deserved for many, many years.
Absolutely. So this module used to be called Detox. We're talking about eliminating toxins from the body. What is, the Institute for Functional Medicine, what does that word and that concept mean in the context of clinical practice to you?
Well, the word detox, I think, has a different connotation when we approach it. Detox has become a very popular term. The media talks about it a lot. People apply it to things like smoothies and dietary supplements, etc. I think the Institute of Functional Medicine really looks at it more from the perspective of the total toxic load, the body burden of both externally acquired toxins, synthetic chemicals, etc., and internal toxins that you produce. So this is a very scientific, evidence-based approach that's really straight out of the medical literature.
Amazing. So we'll get into that a little bit later as we go along. But I guess I just want to catch everyone up who, the last time you were on the show was 2015. A lot has happened.
Well, a lot has happened
since then. So, I know there was a big moment there with the endocrinologists. Like, why are different groups sort of jumping on board to this conversation now?
Yeah, I think the endocrinologists are really spearheading the realization that we need to do something. And that's because endocrine disorders are on the rise. Yeah. We're seeing more type 2 diabetes, we're seeing reproductive disorders, we're seeing congenital disorders, little baby boys that are being born with abnormal genitalia. Yeah. And the endocrinologists are saying, hey, wait a minute, the things that may be responsible for this are in our bodies at a level that are similar to hormones. Parts per million, parts per billion. We've been measuring hormones at that level for years. Yeah. Whereas the toxicologists have asserted that level is too low to cause a problem. And that's where the big split is, this whole concept that low-level exposures over long periods of time can disrupt signaling in the body that can cause what they call endocrine disruption, and that can lead to health disorders. So it's really the clinicians that are leading this, whereas many of the toxicologists who are funded by industry keep asserting that this is all nonsense. It's all made up.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So in the last couple of years, what have been the things that have stood out in the literature that reinforce this more scientific way of thinking about how toxins in the body interact?
I think we've gotten more sophisticated at measuring toxins. Yeah. It used to be that all we could measure was things like heavy metals. Right, so we can look at your body burden of mercury or cadmium or lead or something like that. But other than that, our testing was fairly crude. Now we have not only the ability to measure these toxins in either body fat or what's called fat-adjusted blood levels, but we can also look at metabolomics. Okay. Right? And what I mean by that is we can look at all the chemicals that are in circulation in the body, and we can look at the effect that a toxin might have on those chemical levels. Right? So one of the things I was lecturing on today in the module is biomarkers, and there's 3 different types of biomarkers. There's a biomarker of susceptibility, which would be something like a genetic variant.
Yep.
There's the biomarker of exposure, which is actually measuring the heavy metal or DDT or PCBs or bisphenol A or something like that. And then there's a biomarker of an effect. And so this metabolomic research has allowed us to look at the biomarkers of effect. So we can say, look, this is what these toxins are doing. This is how they're changing human physiology. So this is really profound. I can't even tell you.
That's super exciting. So I know, you've been in practice doing this for a long time, and obviously you have a wealth of experience from just doing this every day and seeing how patients react. Are there things that have even surprised you as you now understand these mechanisms more deeply and this information comes out compared to sort of what you thought you'd see when this kind of information would be available?
I think what's really continuing to surprise me is the pervasiveness of these problems, and the realization that it's getting worse. So let's pick PFAS chemicals, the Teflon-like derivatives. This is suddenly in the news a lot. They've come to be labeled under the term forever chemicals. We were talking about this 15 years ago, right? And suddenly, again, there are many, many studies that are coming out that are confirming what we talked about. So I'm really surprised, I think, at the immensity of this issue, how it's not going away, and unfortunately how we've really had a failure by government. Whatever political party you're talking about, we've had a failure of government to really deal with it.
Yeah, and obviously in the last sort of year particularly, we've had these big lawsuits, and it seems like that may be thrusting this conversation into this collective
really
psyche.
What's driving it. So that's one thing that surprised me, is to see that the battle is being won in the courts. So we've known, for example, for years that glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup, has been implicated in non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. We've known that for a long time. There's studies that have been published in Scandinavia that have shown this. Right? And then the World Health Organization came out and said it's a problem, but then there was all this pushback. No, it doesn't. So the company that makes it says it's not an issue. You don't have to worry about it. But when people have taken this to the courts, the juries have looked at this information and said, we agree. And they've also realized that there's been immense cover-ups going on. The companies that make these chemicals have really had a deliberate campaign to suppress the research on these things. So it's gratifying, I think, to see that the courts are saying, okay, enough of this. People really are suffering as a result of these chemical exposures.
Absolutely. Well, what I'd love to just get into now, because I know you were lecturing, all this morning, is, for clinicians on the front lines who want to do this in a systematic, organized way. You have patients come in. You need to first, I guess, establish that the biotransformation pathway is not operating at a certain level, and you actually have to do something about it.
Yes.
So let's start right from the beginning for doctors and practitioners that might be watching who are just in the process of, starting to get to grips with how to be like a toxicologist or, in a certain way. So what are sort of like the first steps? Because I know that there are more and more doctors that are arriving at these modules like fresh, right?
Fresh.
And they weren't into functional medicine 2 years ago. They feel a moral obligation to get into it now because they realize that this is where things are going and they see the value in their patients. So where do you start with people like that?
First thing I want to do is I want to share with them the evidence that this notion of a total toxic load or a body burden of chemicals is very solid evidence. So that's a big part of the training that we're doing right now, is saying this is not made up. You might hear a website that talks about, mysterious toxins or detoxification. Now, if you read stuff in some of the mainstream medical literature, it makes fun of this. There's mysterious toxins that they're trying to get out with their cayenne and lemonade and, kale juice and all that stuff. Well, you know what? The evidence is very clear that these are not mysterious toxins. We know what they are. And we can measure them. So where I start with the doctors is saying, rest assured, no matter what you've heard, that this might be quackery, this might be fringe medicine, I don't care what you've heard. Here's the data. Let me just show you the data. It's very, very straightforward. So, we've got data showing, for example, that kids sometimes have the highest level of environmental toxins. And then we have to ask the question, where are they getting these? And then you trace that back and say, wait a minute, if you analyze house dust, you find chemicals like phthalates. And here's a study that shows that if you look at the onset, the rise of allergies, right now we have a huge epidemic of allergies and asthma, right? It's expanding at a phenomenal rate. And if you look at the introduction of phthalates or plasticizers in our environment, which are showing up in house dust that kids are breathing, getting into their system, it totally tracks in parallel. So again, I show these doctors, here's the evidence. Here's the evidence.
So now they're convinced. They probably never thought about doing any sort of assessment for a patient on this topic, but now they have to get into it with patients. So what's the baseline there?
Now they get into it, and what we've done is we've developed some very sophisticated questionnaires, some toxicology questionnaires that you can give to every patient. So in my practice, every single new patient fills out a questionnaire about possible toxic exposure. And it's everything from what's your work environment? Do you spray your yard with chemicals? Do you have hobbies? Do you travel a lot? What kind of food do you eat? Do you have a wood stove? Do you live near a fire station? That's something new. Do you live near a fire station? We're finding there are chemicals that come from the firefighting apparatus that gets into the water supply and can be affecting people that way. So very sophisticated questionnaire, but simple and straightforward that we can give to everybody. So it starts with a good history. We were always taught that in medicine anyway. Have a good history. But this is adding on to the history. And then what we do is we show them that there's some really basic tests that everyone does all the time that are open to a different kind of interpretation than you might have thought. For example, HDL, high density lipoprotein cholesterol. If HDL is low, that person may be at risk for toxicity from organophosphate chemicals. Because HDL carries an enzyme called paraoxidase that neutralizes organophosphates. So we're reframing simple tests that doctors have been doing for years, so they don't have to think twice about it. They can get these tests done at any lab, and we're saying, have you thought that this might mean something else than what you realized?
Do you see the wheels starting to turn? I'd imagine if I was a doctor and I'd been seeing patients for years and I heard that, I'd start thinking back of cases where maybe I judged the HDL for some other reason.
Absolutely, absolutely. Another example is having a low white blood cell count. We see this all the time in family practice or internal medicine practice or pediatric practice. Well, we have to consider what might be the cause of that. Is something poisoning the bone marrow, not enough to hurt the person, in a severe way, but enough to cause damage over a long period of time, to slow down their ability to produce white blood cells. Right? So the simple test that we do, and often we'll see it being abnormal, scratch our heads and go, I don't know why it's low, but you seem to be okay, I'm not going to worry about it. So I show doctors the data that associate things like benzene exposure to a low white blood cell count. Well, where could we be getting exposed to benzene? Have you ever heard of fracking?
Have I?
Yeah, so fracking, is now in states all over the country.
And got it in England too, and South Africa.
I did not know it was in England. Oh my.
Well, they're trying to do it. I mean, they're trying to do it everywhere where there's that gas. No, I see that. And even in that situation, I think we were talking about fracking 10 years ago, and here we are now. Oh, there's chemicals in it. We didn't really know.
We didn't know. Gee. Oh my goodness.
So now you have an idea of the total sort of exposure. Is there a way? How do you determine from there how hard you're going to go on this? How important this ranks compared to, let's say, gut issues or other things that might be exposed during a deep, history. How important is toxicity rank compared to these other factors when you're deciding on what the first treatment protocol is going to look like?
Yeah, well, so that's really what functional medicine is all about, systems biology, and so we look at all these different nodes, on what we call the matrix. We look at toxicity, we look at immune issues, we look at structural issues and gut issues. So when you're collecting your data, you're in your mind, you're kind of weighing the importance of that data, and if over and over again a person says things that ring a bell or raise a red flag about potential toxicity, that's what makes you gravitate towards dealing with that issue sooner rather than later. Now, when you look at some of the studies about toxins in our body, you begin to realize that almost everybody has got some degree of toxin.
Yeah.
Almost everybody. Right? And so at some point you do need to address the issue of toxicity.
Yeah.
The question is, do you do that early on? Do you engage in some kind of formal program to, say, clean the person out? Or do you do what I call a gentle detox, which is to just start making suggestions about personal care products and air filters and water filters and things like that. So that's part of detox as well.
Yeah.
Right? Detoxing your environment, decreasing exposure.
I saw a quote the other day, said you either buy a filter or you are a filter.
Yes, yes.
Good, right?
Well, the whole issue right now is that air pollution is on the rise all over the world. All over the world. And we're beginning to realize that air pollution doesn't just cause lung problems. If you get these tiny little particles, the PM 2.5s, they can actually get into the bloodstream, cause inflammation, and that can lead to chronic diseases of all types, including autoimmune disease.
Absolutely, and I've seen type 2 diabetes has a big factor.
As a result of air pollution.
Yeah. So the critics of detoxification will say, hey, your liver and your kidneys, they're doing the detox all the time. So why do you need to do a detox?
Yeah.
And I'd love to just hear you reflect on that, because that's what I hear from doctors who are still kind of in the system.
The mainstream doctors will say, if you just drink more water, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
But that ignores this huge body of evidence that shows that certain toxins are fat soluble. They're called lipophilic toxins. And those fat soluble toxins can go into your body fat and stay there for a lifetime. Wow. So you can get exposed to DDT, when you're a little child, and it'll still be there many years later.
So what are some of the strategies to get into that?
Well, we know that there are enzyme systems in the liver, as you mentioned, but also in other organs in the body called the phase 1 and phase 2 enzyme systems. And those systems are specifically there to change the chemical structure of these fat-soluble toxins so that they now become water-soluble and you can eliminate them. You can get rid of them. And so what we want to do is activate those enzyme systems. And that's really what scientific detoxification is all about, is looking at those enzyme systems and saying, okay, how can we modify them? How can we manipulate them? And that process is called biotransformation. So the process of supporting biotransformation is assisted biotransformation. It's another way to think about detox.
So how do you know that you're winning? So you're working with a patient, you obviously could see symptomatic improvement, but that's not always linear, right? So then how do you know, what are the strategies you use to show patients, hey, this is working, the body burden's going down, for instance?
Let me just give you an example of something from the research that we can then extrapolate from and talk about, what can happen in clinical practice.
Yeah.
So there's an area in, I think it's Southeast China, that's particularly polluted.
Yeah.
Some researchers from Johns Hopkins decided to try this strategy that I actually use in my clinical practice, which is to give people broccoli sprouts. So they made this drink out of broccoli sprouts and had people in that area in China drink that every day. And then they measured toxins in the urine. And what they found is that their excretion of those toxins went up dramatically as soon as they started drinking the broccoli sprout juice, right? So we can't really measure that, in a typical clinical lab, but that tells me that something is going on. So those people might not feel any different. The typical markers might not be any different, but we can actually prove that that's happening. So we would use similar doses, you know, a handful of broccoli sprouts every day or a broccoli seed extract every day. And, you know, so you can basically take it on, not just on faith, but on that evidence that you're lowering the body burden of a specific type of toxin. Now, if you want to get specific about it, you can measure things like organophosphates. Right? So there are studies done, several of them in kids, where they measured urinary organophosphates, which are pesticide chemicals that are in a wide range of foods.
Yep.
Right? And they did it before and after. They took these kids off packaged foods.
Yep.
And, you know, put them on a whole food diet and measured organophosphates before and after, and you can see the organophosphates plummet. If you put them on organic food in particular, you see a huge plummet. So if you want to do that in practice to prove it, you can do that.
I've seen that is definitely making it into the collective consciousness as well with organic food, and it's really it just brings out how resilient the body is, right? To be able to like move it all out and to be healthy. So yeah, that's great. Well, look, I really appreciate you coming to share all of this fantastic wisdom. I know that toxicity is like a step that every clinician sort of has to get over, because it is something that's hammered in from the other side.
Right.
But
I want doctors to know that this is not that difficult.
Yeah.
Right? That there's practical, simple things that you can do, like using questionnaires in your clinical practice that you administer to people. There's specific foods that you can give people that are scientifically proven, things like curcumin and sulforaphane from broccoli, resveratrol from grapes, you know, simple things that you can recommend to people that do make a huge difference.
So at the end of this video, we are going to be recommending for practitioners to start to do these kind of detox processes in groups, and particularly run by probably like, you know, adjunct practitioners, nurse practitioners, health coaches, dietitians, and nutritionists. My feeling is that this is the way that we get it out to more and more people, because there's something really powerful about a group supporting each other, and I'd love to get your thoughts on whether you think that's a good idea.
I think it's a wonderful idea. I mean, you know, social support is clearly critical for people to be compliant with the regimen. If somebody thinks, hey, I'm the only one on my block that's eating kale, they're not going to do it. But if you look around and everyone's eating kale or drinking kale smoothies, then you're going to be able to adopt it more easily.
Awesome. Well, Doc, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us. Keep up the great work with the Institute for Functional Medicine. We are at the Biotransformation module. If you haven't been, either check it out in person or online. And we've got some great speakers, but we'll take it into the next segment.
Hi, I'm Libby Wilson. I am an MD from Springfield, Ohio. I have been a conventional medicine family doctor for 15 years, and I'm starting a functional medicine practice now. I'm blown away by all that I've learned in the detox module so far. Some personal takeaways that I have learned to implement for myself is I need to eat more of a wide variety of foods. I do a pretty good job of eating good foods, but I eat the same foods over and over and over again, so I'm going to try to broaden my spectrum. I also am going to try not to overcook my food so much, and I'm going to try to add green tea into my diet because that's so important. And so yeah, I think those things will help me be a healthier person and help me make my patients healthier also.
Hi, I'm Mia Coroli, and I've learned in this biotransformation module that diversity on your plate in colors is not only the spice of life, but it feeds your microbiome and keeps you well.
My name is Dr. Brian Glick, and I have a functional medicine practice here in Scottsdale, Arizona. And one of the points that I think is important to remember with detoxification is you have to remember you have to get the gut working properly first. Detoxification cannot be done before a patient is moving their bowels properly and eating well. So sometimes it may take patients months or years to actually get to a point where you can actually detoxify them. So focus on getting their gut working, detoxifying properly, and then you can really dig into these detox principles.
So back to drugs. So remember, there's two ways, aside from the drug itself possibly being toxic if it's the wrong dose, wrong time, wrong person, but then there's the direct. How does it going to directly change the nutrient availability? So we think about drug nutrient depletions, right? So I think we all know statins, and we'll come back to this example a little bit later as well, but we all know statins big drug nutrient depletion there is CoQ10. CoQ10 is needed, and we'll see how that fits into the pathway, but that's needed for detoxification. And then the indirect arm, let's take PPIs as an example, right? Alter the gastric enzymes that in turn then alter your ability to digest food and then to assimilate those nutrients. So two different ways, but two very significant ways in which we can alter the detoxification profile. All right, biochemistry. Again, the excitement is just too much. I need you guys to calm down. All right, so this is like I love this slide because it has a lot on it, but it also has a lot on it. So I really just want you to focus on the cofactors that are involved in phase 1, the cofactors that are involved in phase 2, and then the third thing that we want to think about are those antioxidants, those phytonutrients that are in the middle that serve as a sort of like a fire hydrant, a fire hose to neutralize those reactive oxygen species in the center. So think about that as we refresh. So phase 1 is your activation mechanism. So phase 1, you're essentially taking a chemical compound, you're going to modify it. Usually it's a cytochrome system. There are a couple others that are involved, but usually it's cytochrome P450 system. You're gonna oxidize it, reduce it, hydrolyze it, but essentially you're making it active. You're gonna make this like sassy intermediate in the middle. Phase 2, hopefully, then takes that sassy intermediate and it conjugates it. It neutralizes it, makes it water soluble, it makes it ready to be expelled out the system. Now, genetically, you can have alterations that make one thing slow, one thing fast, but then there's also other variables that can induce or inhibit those pathways as well. And this is really important because what happens if phase 1 is out of sync with phase 2? What happens if you're producing sassy little reactive species that aren't going into phase 2 fast enough, that aren't being neutralized by phase 2 fast enough? And then double down, and maybe this person's eating a really cruddy diet, and they don't have a lot of antioxidants or phytonutrients, and they don't have anything to neutralize the threat of that reactive oxygen species. You're gonna cause even more damage now. So the upregulation of that phase 1, because it's like freaking out that there's a lot of chemicals in here, I gotta like get these things moving, I gotta get them out of here. And so it's really creating a lot of those, what now potentially could be dangerous, reactive, sassy substances. So it's kind of like when you've got like a 4-lane highway that they're doing construction on, which is forever in my state, that all of a sudden bottlenecks and you've got the backup of traffic, right? So essentially all those angry drivers are your reactive oxygen species. So I feel like phase 3 doesn't get talked about enough. It is an important phase, and I think more and more is coming about. It's relatively new in the conversation, I guess. It's highly dependent on the microflora. If you remember what I said before, it is primarily happening in the gut. So anything that's happening that damages the gut, whether it be leaky gut, changes in the microflora, inability to detoxify, food sensitivities, food allergies, any of that stuff is gonna start to alter this phase 3. The other thing is too, it's energy dependent. So if it's energy dependent and you've got somebody who's got a mitochondriopathy, right? Somebody's not producing enough ATP to begin with, they're probably not gonna be as efficient at some of these systems as well. So again, pulling out a little bit from some of these like smaller details and starting to look at how the other systems start to then impact detoxification. We wanna just look at this one piece, but you really can't because all the systems are annoyingly connected. So we have to keep kind of zooming out. So just remembering that exposure to a toxin or xenobiotic is going to then impact gene expression of the enzymes in all 3 phases. That's a good thing because you want your body to respond to the presence of a chemical substance. When it's a bad thing, though, is when you've got mixed messaging that's happening that may not necessarily signal phase 2, for example, to keep up with phase 1. The good news is, like I said before, you can modulate the expression and the speed of these phases. So one way to do it is to activate the NRF2 pathway via the antioxidant response element. So long story short, essentially this is the antioxidant pathway. And so as it turns out, mechanisms that enhance antioxidant capacity also upregulate phase 2 and phase 3. That's really handy, because now you've got kind of like a one-stop shop, not only to neutralize the threat of those reactive oxygen species, but also to enhance phase 2 and phase 3. So one way to do that, fermented vegetables, there we are again, gut microbiome, sounds like it's a pretty important thing. And there are all these other phytochemicals, foods that also enhance that same pathway. So this is a summary. Factors that impact our ability to detoxify. Your nutrient status, micro, macronutrients, a lot of those are big cofactors in terms of detoxification. Antioxidant deficiencies, phytonutrients, constipation. How many patients do you have are constipated? Like all of them, right? And then, of course, genetic factors and variations. All right, we're gonna do a case study. I am so excited. I usually run out of time because I have so much I want to say, and I actually have time for this today. So what we're going to do is I'm going to flip the case study a little bit. Rather than me telling you what I did, I'm going to talk you through kind of my findings and the gathering that I did on the patient. And I'm going to let you guys work in your little groups, your little teams, and I want to see what you guys come up with, and then we're going to talk about what you did, what you come up with, what I came up with, and I think that'll be fun. So this case, this guy, we'll call him Brian. Brian comes to me, he's about 55, 56 years old. He had just gotten some pretty cruddy lab work. His doctor told him that if he doesn't shape up, he's gonna have to start on metformin and he's gonna start on a statin. Brian is actually pretty health literate, is actually really into yoga, really into meditation, has had years of training, is really into this stuff, but has a hard time applying when it comes to food. And so he knows that that is his weak spot. But he really does not want to start on a statin. He's aware of the repercussions, and he knows that once he starts, he's afraid he's never going to be able to get off of it, and it's going to be downhill from there. His father died of a heart attack young, in his early 50s, so he's pretty scared of that. And he's also starting to put on weight around his middle. He is starting to grow the dreaded man boob, and so that is not something that he's happy about. And so he wants to start working out more and gaining more muscle mass, but he's noticing that he's not able to put on as much muscle as he'd like, and he's still not losing the gut. He also just started a relationship, and he is noticing that his libido is not what it used to be, and he's noticing, he's complaining of ED as well. All right. So first thing I start to think about is his hormones. So I run a hormone panel for him, but what I really want to focus on is how much more I got out in terms of the detoxification picture, because it wasn't the first thing I thought of. The first thing I thought of was cardiometabolic. What's happening immune-wise? Is he at risk for having a stroke or something, right? But when I ran some of these panels, I started to see a pattern that kind of led me down the detox kind of route. So if you notice that 1A1 pathway, right, to make 2OH-E1, do you see how upregulated that is? He has a kind of normal range, and then it goes all of a sudden, that dial goes all the way up. And if you look over to the 4OH, that's the dangerous one, right? That's the one, if that's elevated, that's an increased risk for cancers that are related to hormone-like stuff, right? And that's because it's that in and of itself starts to go down a quinolate pathway that starts to damage DNA. And that's the proposed mechanism there. So that's kind of scary. Both of these kind of metabolites are kind of higher than they should be, but what am I starting to think about, right? Upregulation of phase, all together now, phase 1, right? So his CYP, the CYPs, the cytochrome P450 systems, that's your phase 1. All right, so you're thinking, okay, phase 1's upregulated. Why would phase 1 be upregulated? He used to be a smoker. He actually quit smoking. But could some other toxic exposure upregulate that phase 1 pathway? So we should be thinking, okay, what's he being exposed to that might upregulate that phase 1? What else is happening? So He's then trying to convert that 2-OH. He's trying to now put it through phase 2 through methylation. It goes through the COMT methylation kind of pathway. And you see how that's not quite matching up? It's actually a lower methylation. So what's methylation? Do you guys remember what phase is methylation? 2. So what did we talk about before? When phase 1 doesn't equal phase 2, what happens? A lot of reactive, come on, say it louder, guys. Yeah, say it. Yeah, that means that he's probably creating a lot of reactive intermediaries in the middle. His phase 2 is not being activated sufficiently, right? Told you, a little overkill on the animations. All right, so yes, I looked at his, the testosterone stuff. Yeah, I looked at his metabolism of all that stuff. Yeah. But what's really more interesting is look at that DHEAS. To convert DHEA to DHEAS, what do you have to do? Sulfation. What is that? Phase what? 2. Here's another clue. Is he sulfating? No, not enough, right? Okay, so then I looked at his nutrient panel. And look at this. Taurine. Cystathionine, non-existent. Homocysteine, not existent. That looked Okay, so this is all part of the amino acid conjugation, which is what phase? And this one is glutathione methylation conjugation. So all phase 2. His glutamine looked good, so that was exciting. This one's gets really fun. So MMA and FIGLU are both markers for B12 and folate deficiency. You don't have folate and B12, there's a lot of things you can't do, but we're talking about detoxification, but that's a big cofactor in terms of detoxification. Look at his heavy metals. Arsenic, there's that history of smoking maybe, I don't know. Aluminum, cadmium, a little bit of lead. I mean, lead and mercury aren't looking awesome either. Markers for oxidative damage. That 29, that 2-HO2DG, that's a marker for DNA damage. Not looking awesome. Not terrible yet, but not looking awesome. And then the bottom are all markers for detoxification, and most of them are out of range. So I'm going to give you guys a few minutes. Let's take like 5-ish minutes. I want you to think about what would you do in terms of phytonutrients? What would you do in terms of micronutrients, macronutrients? What would you recommend in terms of nutraceuticals?
Hi, my name is Dr. Mary Ellen Chalmers. I'm a functional dentist practicing in Santa Rosa, California, and have been speaking about functional dentistry on behalf of the Institute for Functional Medicine since 2010. The most gratifying thing that I found this year as I was preparing for my presentations here at the Biotransformation module is that the concepts, our view of functional dentistry within IFM is definitely collaborative, and the practice guidelines and all the things that you get in your toolkit that we've been developing over the past 10 years are now being validated in the general evidence-based dental literature in systematic reviews. So we've been right on the money all along that this oral systemic connection is foundational to our health, and that the way in which functional medicine puts the pieces together is invaluable and very, very important for our patients. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dr. Jen Horton, family doctor. I've been practicing family medicine for 19 years. And in the spring of 2019, I took the jump and started my own micro-functional medicine practice. This was based on my experience with the evolution of medicine. I'm studying actively with Institute of Functional Medicine and loving bringing the power of food, movement, meditation, prevention, proactive healthcare to my patients. So if you're thinking about studying functional medicine or on your way on the path, keep going. It's worth it. I love my life. I love what I get to do for patients. I love the time I get to spend with my patients now, and it's worth it.
So there's been a lot of discussion in the functional medicine community about mitochondria and mitochondrial health. And ultimately, I wanted to put that in context because you've heard about detoxification and you've heard about biotransformation, but how do we really activate effective health in the mitochondria? There is a process for doing it, and we caught up with Dr. Andy Heyman. This is the first time that he's been on the Functional Forum since 2014. He's one of the leading educators in functional and regenerative medicine. Check it out, Dr. Andy Heyman. All right, we are here with Dr. Andy Heyman. We are talking about detoxification. And Doc, you know, earlier when we were setting up for this conference, we did that podcast and we talked just about what structure or organizational framework we have to think in to be able to sort of activate detoxification at a much deeper level. So can maybe just you highlight maybe what you think about that and also maybe what you learned this weekend?
Yeah, I think when you have a body burden of toxins that are present, you really have to ask yourself the question, are they even ready to detoxify yet? And I think there are certain fundamental principles that I like to apply before I, let's say, become a little more therapeutically aggressive. The first piece for us is we really have to attack the inflammation that might be generated in the body. I find that if the cell mechanisms are already stressed by that inflammation, and then we expect the cell to start releasing toxins, patients actually do a lot worse. So I'm not so sure they're ready until we begin to gain control of the immune system a little bit. And of course we do that through all of our lifestyle interventions, sleep, stress management, diet, exercise, all in moderation, just to start to build resiliency back into their metabolism. At the same time, usually we have to start filling the tank and repleting nutrients, and then we give certain therapies to start reducing inflammation. On top of that, we start preparing the cells in the cell membranes. So I'm a big proponent, and I think the data supports this, of phospholipid replacement, because so much of toxins are often embedded in lipid layers throughout the body. So when we start turning over cell membranes with phospholipids and healthy fats, that begins to offload some of that burden already. And then I think the final piece, which sometimes practitioners might overlook, is maybe one of the most important vital signs of readiness for detox, which is pH. So this notion that as the body is more acidic, we see inefficiency of enzymes and sluggishness within the detoxification pathways in the liver and the kidneys. So when that happens, we need to work to really raise pH and raise alkalinity to liberate those enzymes and their substrates to make sure that those pathways are open. So that's sort of the pillars that I use of inflammation, lipid replacement, pH management. Once we get the patient to that point, then they're ready to do the deeper cleansing. And I might use chelating agents or other products to help scrub out organic pollutants and heavy metals from the cells and the tissue. But I've learned the hard way that if you start those therapies too soon in the process and the patient is already compromised and depleted and inflamed, it'll make them worse. So we spend some time building them up before we start removing those toxins.
What are some key entry points as far as like when someone comes in to know how ready they are?
Yeah, so pH is one.
Okay, so that's like a simple using a pH strip?
Yeah, they just dab their tongue, or it's a first morning test.
Okay.
The next is we'll just do some nutrient testing to see whether or not they have some of the right cofactors and enzymes and vitamins that participate in the detoxification process. We also use a very special visual test. It's called a visual contrast study. It's a general marker of brain inflammation, but it really signals inflammation in the nervous system in particular. If they fail that test, we know that they're too inflamed and they're not ready yet to start detox. So, we have a variety of ways of sort of triangulating in to determine their readiness for starting to mobilize and remove toxins. And once those things start to improve, once they're passing their visual tests and their pH levels have come back up and we've rebalanced and repleted some of their nutrients, then I know they're ready. I know they're ready.
And any tips for practitioners who maybe they're ready, they start going through it, but they start to maybe have symptoms that make them think that it's not working?
Yeah, so I think that's a good question. And my concern is always, is that part of the detox process that we can tolerate and the patient can tolerate, or is that really a problem that we need to address? What is that signal? And my rule of thumb is, if there are symptoms that the toxins are causing, it could be fatigue or headaches or depression, whatever it is, if those symptoms reappear, they intensify, but less than sort of 50% or so of their original level, that's okay, we're willing to tolerate it. They might need a little bit more support to facilitate that process, and we'll try and keep going. I think actually some of the best remedies are homeopathic drainage remedies that really kind of open those detox pathways. And I wish practitioners were more familiar with homeopathy, because there's so many good solutions in there, especially during the detox process. If the symptoms are really bad, if they're above 50% and they're incredibly problematic and they're interfering with the patient's quality of life significantly, we go back to the drawing board and we say, what else do we need to do? We recheck a pH, we recheck a visual test, we might remeasure nutrients. We have to say, maybe we haven't opened all the pathways that we need for efficient detox. Maybe there's some hidden inflammation that we have to address, or maybe we need to do a little bit longer phospholipid therapy to calm the cell membranes. The body will guide us and tell us, but there is an order to this. And you can't go too aggressive too soon. You will worsen the patient's state. And detox, you have to be careful. I mean, it's an important feature of living in today's toxic world, but you can't just throw chelating agents or detoxifying agents at people and just kind of hope for the best. If they're really depleted and inflamed and broken down, you got to build them up first, and sometimes be pretty gentle along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. So Doc, thanks so much for coming in and sharing the wisdom on detoxification. We are issuing challenge in 2020 for practitioners to really find ways to bring this to more people in their community. And I can see that when people go through an initial, functional medicine, sort of classical detox, there's going to be an opportunity to take a lot of patients a lot further. So thanks so much.
At FullScript, we've been busy creating an industry-leading experience for practitioners so that their patients can experience industry-leading integrative healthcare. How do we do it? By constantly improving practitioner workflows through EHR integrations, we give practitioners the ability to write supplement recommendations through FullScript without leaving their preferred EHR. By making it easy to send similar recommendations and resources to multiple patients with our templates tool. Simply create a recommendation once and customize for each patient. Through Adherence Management, patient adherence is a priority with direct-to-patient prescriptions, fulfillment reminders, refill reminders, and auto-ship. Keeping patients on the path to wellness has never been more attainable. And coming soon, patients will be able to receive customizable reminders via email or text, so even on the busiest of days, their supplement protocol will always be top of mind. We're helping practitioners find the products that are best suited to their patients' needs. With the click of a button, our new search tool helps you find supplements that accommodate allergies, lifestyle choices, and patient preferences. And by using advanced technologies coupled with a mountain of user research and feedback, we're rolling out a brand new, unparalleled, immersive patient experience. At FullScript, we're taking the hassle out of integrative healthcare, one innovation at a time. Join us at fullscript.com/signup.
Hi, I'm John, and I currently practice in Arvada, Colorado. And one thing that I do with all my patients is teach them stress reduction techniques. One thing we learned today in our IFM course on detox was stress detox. And we learned a technique called box breathing. I studied with David G, and he does a technique called 16 seconds, and it's pretty simple to do with most patients. So when you breathe, you teach patients to breathe, you want to teach them to breathe in a box or a 4-second cycle. So you're teaching them to breathe in for 4 seconds, and hold, and then breathe out for 4 seconds, and hold. And that turns on the parasympathetic nervous system, or the rest and relax nervous system, which is highly beneficial in detoxing most patients, and can be taught in obviously less than a minute. And I teach in a conventional type practice, and I am able to teach all my patients this technique, and they find it hugely beneficial. And I usually start them on 1 minute a day in the morning for some type of meditative practice. Box breathing is a great technique to use. So this was one tip or technique that we learned today. You can look up Dr. Minich, and she taught us this technique. She is a great educator at IFM. Thank you.
Hi, this is Dr. Robert Luby, Director of Medical Education at the Institute for Functional Medicine. And the tip of the day is in regard to the Detox or Biotransformation Advanced Practice module. Over the years, this module and this training is becoming more and more concerned with environmental health. And with regard to environmental health, that includes the external environment of your patient and also the internal environment. Really, in our IFM training, we teach all about the internal environment, the 7 nodes of the matrix. But you can consider the external environment as everything that the patient experiences in their life, the antecedents, triggers, and mediators, as well as their behaviors and the 5 modifiable lifestyle factors. In that regard, I'd like to focus on relationships as part of environmental health. Healthy relationships, healthy connections are a critical aspect of maintaining positive environmental health for your patients. In that context, detox group visits or environmental group visits where your patients learn how to improve their biotransformation and elimination are the tip of the month as far as I'm concerned, because getting patients in to shared medical appointments or group visits to help them learn how to go through a safe and effective detoxification program can be a fundamental intervention for successful functional medicine practices.
All right, so we are here in Florida. We have come all the way to see Lara Essere. She is a nurse practitioner and has been doing groups in her practice for a number of years. As part of this forum, we're going to be getting people activated into doing group visits in 2020. So we wanted to come and speak to someone who's been around the block, should we say, when it comes to group visits. So Lara, thanks so much for having us and for being here. So let's start right back at the beginning with your first groups and why you decided to do them, and what was the starting point?
So I started doing groups over 3.5 years ago, and I did it because I needed to leverage myself. I didn't have time. My practice was building. It was just me as a provider of care. I could see 6 or 8 people at one time versus one. And so, 3.5 years ago, I happened to stumble across a tool that I could use in my practice to potentially add group visits. And I'm like, this makes perfect sense to me. Why not start it?
So tell me a little bit about the setting for that first group visit.
So at the time, I only had a 900 square foot to 1,000 square foot building that I was in. And so the first place that I thought of was, why not our employee lounge? We had basically just a conference table that 6 people could sit around, and we had to squeeze into there, but we had a TV up on the wall and I could sit at the end of the table. So it was a very small setting. It was quaint. It was good because we could sit around a table. It worked for us. And in the very beginning, it was kind of hard to convince our clients to even take part in group visits. And so kind of being in that setting that it was small and it was tiny made them feel more comfortable. It didn't seem so big that people got lost in that. So that was the first place we did it.
So was there a moment that you can remember where you were like, oh, wow, this is working?
Well, at first, to try to convince our clients to do it, it was really, really tough because they really wanted personalized attention and they thought that they were going to lose that in a group setting. And so it took a few classes and it took evaluations after the class where people were writing exceptional. This was great. I learned so much. And I was like, wow, this is working. So the epiphany was after routine and after regular classes, getting that feedback that was so positive, it was, wow, this is working and I need to add more. So we started adding more and more classes as we became more and more comfortable. We had the advantage of using some tools, some videos that we had again stumbled across at a conference, and it worked very effectively for us. So we were able to do things like, blood sugar control, cardiovascular. We were able to do content that was very relevant for our clients.
All right, I'd love to ask you just about how you set it up at the beginning. I mean, one of the benefits that I see for groups is that they can be done on insurance, but I know that you started, probably like a lot of people who are watching this, you have a cash practice. So I'd love to get an idea of how you build it and how you organize it.
So when we first started doing the group visits, I wasn't quite sure how to collect for that. Should I collect per class and charge $40 for a very basic class and maybe $75 for something more advanced? Or would it be better to incorporate it in a model of care, somewhat like a program? And that's what's worked most effectively with us. So we basically work with our clients and we help them over a period of time to reach their expectations related to health. And so over a 4 or 6 month period of time that they're affiliated with us, they can attend as many group classes as they want to, but it's one fee for the whole program. And that's worked very, very effectively for us. However, we do have some people that they don't want to take part in a program. They only want to come to a class. And so we do have the ability on an a la carte basis for them to pay per class. And we set up that rate based on how difficult it is and what that class content looks like. Are we going to have a lot of slides? Are we going to have a lot of handouts afterwards? Like, what is our raw cost? Because economically, it has to make sense for the practice.
Yeah, absolutely. So now you've been doing these groups for a while, obviously on a range of clinical topics. What are some of your favorites to run, and what have been some of your favorites for the patients?
So some of my personal favorites have to relate to blood sugar, because I had diabetes when I was 25, and that's really the driving force behind my functional medicine practice to begin with. So I love getting into some of those group visits that are hands-on and literally teaching them how to check their blood sugar, how to do it effectively, how to monitor it, and specifically how to look at those numbers and make sense with those numbers to create change. Because that's what these classes are about. It's practical application of knowledge. It's acting it out. And so that's one of my favorite classes. I also love our detox class. I mean, it works very, very effectively. Detoxification is the platform. It's one of the major foundations of health. And so you have to teach a person specifically how to walk out a detox. And so we have a detox with the doc class that we offer, and we walk them through why, first of all, they need to detox, and then specifically how to do it. And what I love about that is relationships are started within that class, where people decide together that we're going to do this all together. And there's that camaraderie and that excitement about doing detox, and people are the detox is much more effective, and the outcomes are so much better when they're doing it with someone.
Amazing, yeah. So our thesis is, because this is whole forum's on detox and it's December, and our challenge to the practitioners is going to be to run some sort of group in 2020, and ideally in the first quarter, so that you can kind of get your feet wet. It seems like that might be the right time of year to do it, right?
We do it every year at the beginning of the year. We actually set them up in December, and we kind of we plant a seed, and we say almost like a save the date for a wedding. Save the date, get ready for detox, because January is the big time to do that. So they already know that there's a date on the calendar for this particular launch, and they're expecting it. So yeah, first quarter is amazing.
So if you were giving advice to practitioners who are going to run maybe their first detox group in the first quarter of 2020, what would be your advice?
So my first advice would be sit down, plan it out. The best way to be successful is to have a plan. They need to find the product of choice. Choose a specific product. There are several detox kits on the market, but choose the one that they feel is best for them and it's easy to educate on. I would say choose a shorter detox. Do a 7-day versus a 14 or a 21-day. Keep it smaller. It's better that way. And then just make sure that you have plenty of detox kits ready to give out that specific day and ready to sell that particular day, because plan on more, because people do really get excited about it.
And I'm sure they might bring a friend or someone along that you don't expect.
Yeah, and actually we encourage them to do that, because when you have a best friend or you have a spouse that wants to do this for you, you're going to have a better outcome. So yeah, bring a friend.
So one of the reasons why, we ended up partnering with the Lifestyle Matrix Resource Center was because of the group visit toolkits. Ever since I saw those 6 years ago, I was just like, look, this is the way, and it's so easy. What's been the impact of having those kind of resources to make this easier for you?
Well, first and foremost, I would have never started group visits if it wasn't for those toolkits. Or let me say this, it probably wouldn't be until it would have been a delayed start. I knew I needed to do something. I needed to leverage myself, but I didn't know that I could create that content yet. So actually having those toolkits has been amazing, because we basically have those classes. We open up our class with just a brief survey, and we use the tools that they've given us. So it's very, very easy. It's like, like open, you use the kit. It's super simple. We get them to fill out the questionnaires, we run the video, and then we create a discussion afterwards. And so that is the primary reason that we started doing group visits to begin with. We have since the content, since we've grown beyond that content, we've now taken that and we now develop some of our own content, but we still use those videos.
So I know last year, actually, you had a chance to sort of reimagine your practice from scratch, right? Knowing that you were going to do these groups. So what is the group environment that you have now that you'll be able to like create it for yourself?
Super excited that now, as a result of group visits working, we created a teaching kitchen and a classroom setting. And so we have about 250 to 300 square foot that is specifically for classes like this. And we have rolling tables and rolling chairs that we can move around. And so if classes are better in somewhat of a round table forum, we can do that. If it's better more of a discussion, we put them more me at the front and the classes lined up side by side. And sometimes the tables are gone and we just have chairs because the content of the class is we want to have more of that open feel where people feel like they can engage with one another. So it's allowed us to really expand what we do. Now we do things like cooking and teaching people how to use their own appliances in the kitchen. So we've taken it way beyond now to hands-on experience.
What are some of the appliances that you teach on?
So we use the Instapot, teach people how to cook things in no time flat, the air fryer, that's one of our favorites, dehydrators, juicing, we teach them how to blend a Power Pack smoothie, so juicing and blending, all of those things. So that's more the modern day kitchen.
Yeah.
We're on the go.
That's great. And when you've run these groups, is there sort of like an optimum number of people that you think fits, and does that change depending on the content?
It definitely does change. I find that smaller settings of 6 to 10 people are more willing to exchange information. So in our video classes, we run about 6 to 10. If it's smaller than that, though, it still works very, very effectively because as long as you're willing to engage and get them to ask questions, it's good either way. But 6 to 10 seems to be that sweet spot. When it comes to cooking classes, anywhere from 4 to 6 tends to work a little bit better because they ask a lot of questions and we want them to be able to see what we're doing specifically.
Wonderful. Well, look, I really appreciate you first and foremost for being out on the forefront. We have a big vision for how we think group visits could make functional medicine the standard of care by making something that's really affordable and accessible. And so, it's only really available because people like yourself have been on the front lines and proving that this really works and people want this kind of care. So thank you so much for all of your amazing work, and excited to share your best practices here. So we'll have way more resources on how you can do the Detox with your doctor program. We are starting our challenge next week where any practitioner can come in and we are going to give you the fundamentals of how to run a group. And starting with Detox in the first quarter is going to be easy to recruit. It's going to be easy to run. You can see that you can do it on cash or insurance. So Laurie, thanks so much for being on the Functional Forum.
Thanks so much for having me today. It was great.
Thanks so much for being part of the Functional Forum, and we are super excited to see what we can all do together in 2020. It feels like the last 6 years has been building up to this moment where there is an opportunity for functional medicine group visits to become a new standard of care for everyone. And that is why we want to activate you, the practitioner, to get started with building group visits in your community, and biotransformation and detoxification is a great place to start. So build your community in 2020. We've got the links below. We're going to have a challenge starting next week. Thanks so much for watching. We're just getting started, and we'll see you next time.